You've been lied to. Every piece of good advice about being a modern man, every workshop on emotional intelligence, every guru telling you to feel your feelings, it's all designed to turn you into something safe, predictable, and ultimately harmless. You're in a meeting. Your boss is pushing a deadline that's impossible. Your team's stressed, and deep down, you know this whole project is heading toward disaster. The old you would have spoken up, maybe even pushed back hard, but you've been working on yourself, right? You've learned about emotional regulation, about being the bigger person. So you nod, smile, and say, "I understand the pressure. Let's see what we can do." You walk out feeling mature, evolved, and completely powerless. Sound familiar? When did being reasonable become the same thing as being neutered? And why does every piece of advice designed to make you a better man leave you feeling like less of one? Here's what nobody wants to tell you. Most modern advice about masculinity is designed to make you manageable, not powerful. They've taken the raw edge that made men builders, protectors, and leaders throughout history, and they've filed it down to a smooth, socially acceptable nub. You've been conditioned to believe that your natural instincts, your drive to compete, to challenge, to sometimes be disagreeable, are toxic. That your impulse to take risks, to push boundaries, to occasionally be the guy who says, "This is bullshit," in a room full of nodding heads, is something that needs to be corrected. But think about this for a second. Every great achievement in human history, every breakthrough, every moment when someone stood up and changed the game, it came from men who refused to be reasonable when reason meant accepting the unacceptable. Yet somehow, we've been convinced that being consistently agreeable is the highest form of masculine evolution. The truth is, you're not being taught emotional intelligence. You're being taught emotional compliance. There's a massive difference, and confusing the two has created a generation of men who are technically functional but spiritually castrated. They can navigate office politics. They never raise their voice. They always consider everyone's feelings. And they've completely lost touch with the force that made them men in the first place. This isn't about going back to some caveman stereotype. This is about recognizing that someone has convinced you that your strength is your weakness and your instincts are your enemy. And until you see this clearly, you'll keep wondering why you feel so empty. Jordan Peterson has been saying this for years, though he gets crucified for it. He talks about how men need to integrate their shadow, not eliminate it. The shadow isn't your dark side that needs to be suppressed. It's your capacity for controlled aggression, for righteous anger, for the kind of force that protects what matters. When you're taught to suppress this completely, you don't become enlightened, you become impotent. Carl Jung went even deeper. He understood that a man who cannot access his own capacity for destruction cannot truly protect anything. He called it the integrated masculine, someone who could be dangerous, but chose not to be. The key word there is chose. If you're incapable of being dangerous, if you've been conditioned out of every sharp edge, then your gentleness isn't a choice. It's just what's left after everything powerful has been removed. But here's where it gets really interesting. Alan Bloom, in The Closing of the American Mind, warned about this exact phenomenon decades ago. He saw how educational and social systems were producing men who were technically educated but had lost what he called spiritedness. That fundamental drive to fight for what they believe in, to be willing to stand alone against the crowd when necessary. These weren't random observations. These thinkers saw the blueprint being laid out. Create a society where men are productive, compliant, and emotionally regulated, but strip away their capacity for genuine rebellion, for necessary conflict, for the kind of righteous stubbornness that changes the world. And if you look around today, If you really look at the men in your life, how many of them have that fire anymore? How many would be willing to risk social disapproval, career consequences, or relationship conflict to stand for something that matters? The evidence is everywhere. We've got the most educated, most emotionally aware, most evolved generation of men in history. And they're also the most anxious, most depressed, and most fundamentally unsure of their own worth. That's not a coincidence. Let me give you 3 uncomfortable truths that nobody wants to acknowledge. First truth: nice guys don't finish last because they're nice. They finish last because they've been convinced that having standards is mean. You've been taught that being agreeable is the same as being good, when in reality, a man who agrees with everything believes in nothing. When you never push back, never set boundaries, never say no, this isn't acceptable, you're not being mature, you're being weak. And deep down, everyone knows it, including you. Think about the men you actually respect, not the ones you're supposed to respect, not the ones who get praised in corporate training videos, but the ones you genuinely look up to. I guarantee they all have one thing in common. They're willing to be disagreeable when it matters. They'll stand their ground even when it's uncomfortable. They have lines they won't cross and standards they won't compromise. That's not toxicity, that's integrity. But somehow, you've been convinced that having non-negotiables makes you inflexible, that standing firm makes you difficult. The result? You've become infinitely flexible, which means you stand for nothing. You bend so far backward to accommodate everyone else's feelings that you've lost touch with your own. And then you wonder why people don't take you seriously, why your opinions carry no weight, why you feel invisible in your own life. Second truth: emotional intelligence has been weaponized against you. Real emotional intelligence means understanding emotions, yours and others, so you can respond appropriately. But what you've been taught isn't emotional intelligence. It's emotional suppression disguised as sophistication. You've been conditioned to believe that feeling anger, frustration, or righteous indignation is a sign of immaturity, when these emotions are often exactly what the situation calls for. When someone disrespects you, anger is the appropriate response. When you see injustice, righteous indignation is healthy. When someone tries to manipulate you, suspicion and pushback are signs of wisdom, not character flaws. But you've been taught to process these emotions away, to always find the mature response, which usually means accepting unacceptable behavior with a smile. This has created men who can articulate their feelings beautifully, but have no idea how to act on them effectively. They can journal about their boundaries, but can't enforce them. They can discuss their values, but won't fight for them. They've become emotionally articulate and practically powerless, which is exactly what the system wanted. Third truth: your desire to be liked is killing your ability to be respected. You've been sold this idea that if you're just understanding enough, accommodating enough, emotionally available enough, everyone will appreciate you. But respect and appreciation are different things. People appreciate doormats. They're convenient, but they don't respect them. The men who get real respect, the kind that translates into influence, opportunity, and genuine relationships, are the ones who are selective with their approval. They don't need everyone to like them because they like themselves enough to have standards. They're willing to be disliked by some people in order to be truly valued by the right people. But you've been taught the opposite. You've been conditioned to believe that being universally liked is more important than being genuinely respected. So you've spent years smoothing every rough edge, apologizing for every strong opinion, qualifying every position with "but I could be wrong." The result is that you've become background noise in your own life, pleasant, inoffensive, and ultimately forgettable. Here's what happens if you keep following this good advice. And I'm not sugarcoating it, because somebody needs to tell you the truth. You become functionally invisible. Not because you're not capable, not because you're not smart, but because you've trained yourself out of every quality that makes a man memorable. You'll be the guy who gets bypassed for promotions because, while you're competent, you don't have that indefinable quality that makes people think, this guy can handle the big decisions. You'll be reliable, responsible, and completely forgettable. Your relationships will become transactional. When you have no edge, no standards, no willingness to create necessary conflict, people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. Your partner will appreciate how easy you are to deal with, but she'll lose that spark of excitement that comes from being with a man who has his own strong opinions and boundaries. Your friends will like having you around because you never cause drama, but they'll stop coming to you when they need real advice or support because they know you'll just tell them what they want to hear. This is the hidden cost of being perpetually agreeable. You become useful, but not essential. People will like having you around, but they won't miss you when you're gone. And deep down, you'll know it, which will eat away at your self-respect in ways you can't even articulate. Your decision-making will atrophy. When you spend years training yourself to consider everyone else's feelings before your own, to find the most diplomatic solution to every problem, to always seek consensus before action, you lose the ability to make quick, decisive choices. You'll overthink everything, second-guess yourself constantly, and become paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice, which usually means the choice that might upset someone. This might sound minor, but it's devastating. Life rewards decisiveness. Opportunities don't wait for you to poll everyone's feelings. Leadership doesn't emerge from committee decisions. The moments that define your life, the career moves, the relationship choices, the times when you need to stand up for yourself or someone else, these moments require the ability to act quickly and decisively, even when you don't have perfect information. But you've been trained out of this capacity. You've been convinced that taking decisive action without extensive consultation is arrogant, that trusting your gut is primitive, that moving fast means you're not being thoughtful. So you'll spend your life watching other men, men who kept their edge, men who trust their instincts, men who are willing to be wrong rather than paralyzed, take the opportunities you were too mature to seize. The worst part? You'll rationalize it. You'll tell yourself that you're being responsible, that you're considering all angles, that you're evolved beyond the need for quick decisions. But inside, you'll know the truth. You've become afraid of your own judgment, and that fear will cost you everything that matters. Stop apologizing for having standards. This is the first and most important change you need to make. Every time you catch yourself saying, "I'm sorry, but," before expressing a preference, opinion, or boundary, stop. Your standards aren't something to apologize for. They're what make you who you are. Start small. If someone suggests a restaurant you don't like, instead of saying, "I'm fine with whatever," try, "I'd prefer somewhere else." If a coworker consistently interrupts you in meetings, instead of just accepting it, say, "Let me finish my thought." If your partner makes plans without consulting you, instead of just going along, say, "Next time, I'd like to be part of the planning." This isn't about being difficult for the sake of it. It's about remembering that your preferences matter, that your comfort has value, that your input is worth something. You've been so conditioned to prioritize everyone else's needs that you've forgotten how to advocate for your own. But here's the thing, when you don't advocate for yourself, you're actually making life harder for everyone else because they have to guess what you want, and they usually guess wrong. Practice necessary conflict. This is where most men who've been domesticated struggle the most. You've been taught that conflict is always negative, that disagreement means relationship damage, that the goal is always harmony. But some conflict isn't just necessary, it's healthy. It's how boundaries get established, how respect gets earned, how real intimacy gets built. Start practicing this in low-stakes situations. When someone cuts in line, say something. When a service provider doesn't deliver what they promised, speak up. When someone makes a comment that rubs you the wrong way, address it directly instead of letting it slide. You're not looking for fights, but you're also not avoiding every uncomfortable conversation. The goal is to rebuild your comfort with tension. Most emotionally evolved men have lost this completely. They'll do anything to avoid making someone else uncomfortable, even when that discomfort is appropriate and necessary. But tension is often the precursor to resolution. Avoiding it doesn't make problems go away, it just makes them fester. Here's what most people don't understand. The ability to create necessary tension, to be comfortable when others are uncomfortable, to hold your ground when pressure mounts. These aren't signs of emotional immaturity. They're signs of emotional strength. And until you rebuild this capacity, you'll remain at the mercy of everyone else's emotions. Trust your instincts before you trust the consensus. Your gut reaction to people and situations exists for a reason. It's processing information faster than your conscious mind can analyze, picking up on patterns and inconsistencies that your rational brain hasn't caught yet. But you've been trained to dismiss these instincts as prejudice, bias, or primitive thinking. This is catastrophic. Your instincts are often your best early warning system. When something feels off about a person, a deal, the situation, that feeling is usually telling you something important. But you've been conditioned to ignore it, to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, to always assume positive intent. Start paying attention to your initial reactions again. When you meet someone new, what's your first impression? When you're presented with an opportunity, what's your gut response? When someone tells you something, do you instinctively believe them, or do you sense something's not quite right? Don't immediately dismiss these reactions. Sit with them, investigate them. Often, you'll find that your instincts were picking up on something your rational mind missed. This doesn't mean becoming paranoid or cynical. It means integrating all the information available to you, logical and intuitive. The most effective men learn to use both their analytical abilities and their instinctive responses. They think and they feel, and they make decisions based on the complete picture. Set non-negotiables and enforce them. This is the big one. You need to identify the things that are absolutely unacceptable to you, in relationships, in work, in life, and you need to be willing to walk away when those boundaries are crossed. Not threaten to walk away, not negotiate around them, not make exceptions for special circumstances. Walk away. This sounds harsh, but it's actually the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others. When you have clear, enforced boundaries, people know exactly where they stand with you. There's no confusion, no guessing, no walking on eggshells. Your relationships become cleaner, more honest, and more respectful because everyone knows the rules. But here's the catch. You have to be willing to lose things you value in order to keep your integrity. You might lose a job that pays well, but requires you to compromise your values. You might lose a relationship that's comfortable, but doesn't respect your boundaries. You might lose friends who only liked you when you were accommodating their bad behavior. This is the price of self-respect, and it's non-negotiable. Men who aren't willing to pay this price end up living lives that look successful from the outside, but feel hollow from the inside. They have all the external markers of success, but none of the internal satisfaction that comes from knowing you've lived according to your own standards. Here's what naturally happens when you stop being so damn agreeable all the time. And this isn't some motivational promise, it's just observable reality. People start taking you seriously, not because you've become difficult or aggressive, but because you've become selective. When your approval isn't automatic, when your agreement isn't guaranteed, when your presence isn't taken for granted, suddenly these things have value. You become someone whose opinion actually matters because it's not a given. You've probably noticed this with other men you respect. When they speak, people listen. When they agree with something, it carries weight. When they disagree, people pay attention. That's not because they're louder or more aggressive than everyone else. It's because they've demonstrated that their positions are considered, their standards are real, and their word actually means something. This is the paradox that nobody explains. The more willing you are to disappoint people, the more they tend to respect you. The more selective you are with your approval, the more valuable that approval becomes. The more comfortable you are with necessary conflict, the more people trust you to handle difficult situations. Your relationships improve dramatically, but not in the way you'd expect. You don't become more popular, you become more valued. The people who stay in your life are there because they genuinely want to be, not because you've made it easy and comfortable for them. The relationships that don't survive your new boundaries were probably draining you anyway. You just couldn't see it because you'd normalized always giving more than you received. With romantic relationships, this shift is often startling. When you stop being endlessly accommodating, when you start having preferences and boundaries and non-negotiables, you become more attractive, not less. This confuses men who've been taught that being agreeable is the path to love. But it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Nobody wants to be with someone who has no standards, because it implies they have no standards for themselves either. You have probably already noticed how people respond to men who know what they want and aren't afraid to say so. There's a magnetic quality to that kind of clarity, a respect that gets generated automatically. It's not about being domineering or inflexible. It's about being solid, dependable in a different way. Not dependably agreeable, but dependably authentic. Your decision-making becomes razor sharp. When you're not constantly second-guessing yourself, when you're not paralyzed by the fear of disappointing someone, when you trust your judgment enough to act on it, you start moving through life with efficiency that's almost startling. Opportunities that would have paralyzed the old you with analysis become straightforward choices. This creates a positive feedback loop. The more decisive you become, the more opportunities present themselves. The more willing you are to disappoint some people, the more you attract the right people. The more comfortable you become with necessary tension, the more respect you command in difficult situations. You start to understand why every great leader, every man who's ever built something significant, every person who's ever changed the game, they all had this quality. Not because they were assholes, but because they were willing to be disliked in service of something bigger than universal approval. Look, I'm not telling you to become some caricature of masculinity. I'm not suggesting you start picking fights or treating people badly. What I'm saying is simpler and harder. Stop being afraid of your own strength. The world needs men who can think clearly under pressure, who can make hard decisions when everyone else is paralyzed, who can say no when no is the right answer, even when it's unpopular. It needs men who can be gentle by choice, not because they've been domesticated into helplessness. You can be emotionally intelligent without being emotionally neutered. You can be considerate without being a pushover. You can be evolved without being emasculated. But you have to stop confusing weakness with wisdom. And you have to stop letting other people's comfort take priority over your own integrity. Every day you spend being endlessly agreeable is a day you're not building the kind of respect from others and from yourself that actually matters. Every time you avoid necessary conflict, you're choosing short-term comfort over long-term respect. Every time you apologize for having standards, you're teaching people that your boundaries don't really exist. The men who command real respect, who build things that matter, who have relationships that actually fulfill them, they all learned this lesson eventually. Some learned it early, some learned it the hard way, but they all learned it. You can't be everything to everyone without becoming nothing to yourself. The good news is, it's not too late. You can start today. The next time someone asks for your opinion, give it honestly. The next time someone crosses a boundary, enforce it. The next time you feel that instinct to stand your ground, don't rationalize it away. Trust it. You might lose some people who were only around because you made their lives easier. You might face some conflict you've been avoiding. You might have to have some uncomfortable conversations. But what you'll gain is something much more valuable. You'll start to respect yourself again. And here's the thing about self-respect. It's contagious. When you start demanding better for yourself, the world starts offering it. When you stop accepting unacceptable behavior, people stop offering it. When you remember what you're worth, others remember too. So what's it going to be? Are you going to keep following advice designed to make you manageable? Or are you going to remember what it feels like to be a man who can't be pushed around? Are you going to keep prioritizing everyone else's comfort over your own integrity? Or are you going to start building the kind of life that actually deserves your respect? If this hit home, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. There's another video coming up that you need to see. One that'll show you exactly how to rebuild what you've lost. Until next time, and I'll see you in the next video.